So I get asked all the time from all these people whether or not the career track they're on, the background they have, the education they have, is that going to lead them to real success? And I often say to them, it doesn't matter where you come from. What matters is, are you focused? Are you working hard? And more importantly, are you over-delivering? And our next guest is the epitome of always over-delivering. Here is someone who started as an accountant and decides to partner with one of his clients, who happened to be Nelson Peltz, to build one of the most important private equity firms and funds and businesses on the planet.
And what Nelson saw, and Peter May, who's our next guest, is that he was going to do more than what was expected of him, which is something his father taught him. And Nelson saw that early on and took him into his family business. Peter takes a shot and leaves his professional career trajectory, where he's about to become a partner, and he joins this frozen food company, this family business. And they go through a 50-year career together in a relationship where it wasn't always easy. I mean, they struggle. They're going from business to business. They're taking on enormous amounts of debt, but they get better and better and better. And they pioneer this concept of constructive activism.
What I think is so interesting about Peter is that the rules that he uses to build his businesses and his empire is very simple. For example, like they literally says this on their coffee mugs. It says expenses down, sales up,
and cash is king.
And then cash is king on the back. But they are not people that are driven by ego or driven by, like, in fact, they talk about they don't need to be right. They just want to get rich. And in fact, by using that, they get incredibly rich by never having to be right, but always focusing on good businesses, making them better. And by doing that exact thing, they were able to get into companies like DuPont and Wendy's and Arby's and Tim Hortons and so many other companies, and have made them incredible amounts of wealth, but also they've taken good companies and made them great by using this exact philosophy.
And he has this unique way of thinking about EBITDA and the importance of the DA, and how to view the DA and how not to view the DA being depreciation and amortization. We got to talk about Peter's philanthropy because it's unique. Whereas a lot of our big shots give lots of money, but Peter truly does engage philanthropy. I mean, he took Sinai Health and he turned it around. He took his business skills.
He uses business. That's right. He uses business skills in every aspect of his life. It's an amazing interview. The stories are incredible. And if anyone is watching and wants to figure out whether or not they're on the right path, are they going to be able to achieve the success they want because of, they're an accountant or they're working at some restaurant? It doesn't matter. What matters is, are you over delivering consistently? It's an amazing interview. We know you're going to love it. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter May. So this big shot thing is super fun. We're having a great time. People are loving it. It's a little expensive. Just to say it. At the end of the day, we are,
I'm glad you said it.
We're still stingy Jews here. It's really quite expensive. And you and I are funding this whole thing ourselves. It's not cheap. I think at the very least, we should at least promote our tea business.
You all see the production quality.
The production quality is incredible. We have an amazing staff, tons of producers, and it's a little expensive.
So I'm obsessed with tea. I built David's Tea. I left many years ago. And Harley actually...
I can't believe we're doing this. This is perfect.
We're doing this because we have great tea, but we got to pay for Big Shot.
Perfect.
So Harley got me back into tea. I would curate these green tea collections for you. You're having trouble sleeping in the evenings. I'm like, you got to switch coffee. You don't need 10 coffees a day.
If we're going to tell the story, let's tell the story.
Right.
I had been drinking so much during the pandemic. I was by myself, obviously, like the rest of us were, and I was drinking a ton of coffee. And my anxiety was peaking. And actually, you had said you should switch off of coffee in the afternoon and move to really high-quality green tea.
The caffeine in green tea interacts differently. You don't get the big spike and crash.
It's like a calm alertness almost,
right? Calm alertness, and green tea's amazing, like really high quality green tea. And then,
but frankly, like most people, I'd never had high quality green tea. Most of the tea that I had consumed in my life, it was like in a gift. I'd give a talk somewhere, and they give me a gift box or some sort of gift package, and there'd be some like random tea bags in there. But I'd never actually had really high end green tea. So you very kindly started curating this box of incredibly high end, amazing green tea. And you also began to sort of, jerry rig these accessories for me. You'd say, drop it in here for 3 minutes and then take it out, make sure it's not steaming. And you just created this incredible tea setup for me. In fact, you know this, but next to my home office, I now have a little tea area that you actually created for me.
Right.
But green tea in particular, and having you curate this tea for me was this incredible new element of my life because it allowed me to stay really energized, really focused in the afternoon without having any issue with sleeping.
And that was the inspiration for Firebelly. Finally, I was like, you're like, let's do it. I'll be your partner. So we started Firebelly Tea. Most people want to take a tea bag and dunk it in the water. And the reality is there's this rich experience you can get with tea where you take the time to make it properly, whether it's green tea, black tea, oolong tea, herbal teas. We're doing something special with Fire Belly.
Yeah, so Fire Belly is the highest, the best tea, and actually you got a chance to design every single accessory yourself.
Absolutely.
You went ahead and figured out, this is the best teacup, this is the best strainer for it, this is the best whisk in terms of how to make great matcha. But this is the best tea and the best tea products ever. And please buy our tea. We need a way to pay for more Big Shot episodes. So we don't need your money, but we would appreciate you buying some amazing green tea from firebellytea.com. It is not just a pitch, it is also the greatest tea ever, and it would make us really happy.
If you don't like it, we'll give you your money back.
No, we don't have to do that. We're not giving the money back.
Why not?
We're keeping
You're
your
gonna
money,
love it.
but you're gonna love it.
You're gonna love it.
All of a sudden, you're such a big shot. You're giving people's money back. Don't give the money back.
You'll give it as a gift. It makes a great gift.
It's a great gift. It's great tea. It's great accessories. You actually will really, really love it and allow us to pay for more of these Big Shot episodes. So that's our pitch, and all of you must be laughing wherever you're sitting right now watching this. We don't care. We
actually know tea well, though.
We know. I mean, we also know e-commerce well too.
Yeah, true.
So we know e-commerce. We know tea. Fire Belly tea. Go buy some. Help us pay for more Big Shot episodes. So I know our audience. I know our audience really well. They're gonna say, yeah, we love your tea. We want to buy from you. We want to support Big Shot. Is there a coupon code? Like, I'm gonna get my aunt or someone in my family's gonna call me and be like, I love the tea. It's really great. Can I get a discount? So is there a code we can give them?
Big Shot 15.
Big Shot 15. Okay.
Big Shot
Use
15.
code Big Shot 15 for 15% off our tea and tea accessories. And if you don't like the tea and you don't like the accessories, David will give you your money back. I will not. He will. That's it.
I'll give you your money back.
Okay.
I got you.
All right. I won't.
Started from the bottom, now the whole team here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now my whole team in. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now the whole team here. I done kept it real from the jump.
So let's start with the big question that we have, which is you are currently on the board of, let me see if I get this straight, Wendy's, Tiffany's, Mondelez. You created something called constructive capitalism. How does a middle-class kid from nowhere start? And how did you, what was it like growing up? And we're curious about this journey from that moment around the dinner table to where you are now. What was it like growing up in your house?
So I grew up in the 50s. Okay, I was born in 1942, just at the end of beginning of World War II, but had no real relationship to the war. The 50s was probably one of the special times in America where the war was over, Eisenhower was president. It was an incredibly quiet time when you look at the way the world is today and how it's been, from the time that the Vietnam War started or some of the college campus issues in the mid-60s. The time I grew up was, I grew up in a suburb of Long Island. You rode your bike everywhere. You didn't lock your door. The keys were in the car in the driveway. It was that kind of a time. And it was really, none of us knew there was anything going on in the world except that we would have air raid drills because it was the Cold War. So, you'd have air raid drills where you'd go under the desk and stuff like that. Because the Cold War had gotten, had started by the time when I was in elementary school. I grew up in a middle-class family, reasonably affluent for the context of my people that I knew. My parents grew up in Brooklyn. Interestingly, none of my family, my mother's family, 3 of her 4 grandparents were born in the United States.
Wow.
And my father's family, his parents were both born in the United States.
Which is very rare relative to everybody else.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But they both lived in Brooklyn. My father's father was a butcher, and but he had 2 butcher shops, so he was a successful butcher and had a little real estate, and they had a 2-family house. And my father's family lived downstairs, and my mother's family lived upstairs.
Wow.
And that's where my parents met.
Amazing.
And my mother was an unusual woman because her mother was a balabusta. She was loved to do stuff, and she worked. And my mother's father worked for the government. He was a customs inspector. So very modest families, but very aggressive, in terms of education. So my mother went to Hunter College and then got a master's at NYU in 1934.
Which was really rare to do a master's and as a woman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she was a social worker for about 10 years. And, that was, her makeup was do stuff. And my father, interestingly, was also very interested in going into business and doing something creative. His father said, I'll pay for college if you want to be a doctor. And he said, I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be a businessman. And so his father would not pay for college. And so he worked in the Diamond District during the day and put himself through NYU and got his bachelor's degree and then became a CPA and then joined one of his clients and then the guy as the CFO. And when the guy died, he then became president. The guy died. He took over the company. He built it into a pretty good-sized company called Diana Stores Corporation. It was on the New York Stock Exchange.
He's a schmatologist.
What?
He's a schmatologist. It's clothing, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And
we love the schmata business.
Yeah, totally. My family
the connection to Jews in the schmata business is amazing.
And all the people I grew up with, most of their parents were working on 7th Avenue making stuff. My family was fancy because we were buying the stuff they were making.
You were the retailer.
So we were the retailer, exactly. But every vacation that we ever had as a family was driving to Florida and stopping at every store on the way so my father could check them out, or going to, we went west to Oregon or to Wyoming, and there were stores all over the country, which was a great
So it was like
experience.
research basically for the store.
Exactly. It was, he was making his stops and visiting and seeing what was going on.
And you're seeing this as a young kid. It must have had quite the impression on you.
And so, to me, that was pretty cool. And I wanted to follow that. And my father was a great role model. An interesting role model, when you think about parents today, they're so involved with their children. In my generation, the parents were not involved with their children except to set an example, provide an education, be a role model. But I don't remember very often playing, having a catch with my dad.
Right.
We would go out as a family. He was a big golfer, and he'd come home from the golf club early, which most fathers didn't do. And we'd go into the city to do something, go to a museum or whatever, because my parents loved culture, and kind of that rubbed off on me tremendously. But it wasn't the kind of, today I see with my children and how they raise their children, they're in every detail of the life. They go to every game.
Every extracurricular activity.
Everything that they could, they also push their kids to the point of almost craziness. But it wasn't like that. So my father I never even thought of him as dad. I thought of him as, I may call him dad, but he was my father. And he was incredibly ethical, stand-up guy. Everybody thought he was one of the great guys in the community.
Did business become a way for you to bond with him?
Some later on in life, yes. Later on, no question about it. And so during a couple of summers, I worked in his office, for a summer job, and I was always Sam May's son, and I knew that was not going to be my life.
You wanted to be independent.
I wanted to have my own identity, and there was no way I was going to do that. But I did follow his entree into career path, which was he went, he was a CPA and then joined a client. And in the days that I wanted to get involved in business, when I started out, so I went to the University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Great school.
Wonderful school. I went there because I didn't get into the Ivies that I applied to. Okay. I mean,
it's pretty good.
Have to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Didn't realize that I went to a better school than most of the ones I applied to. But, actually, my experience at the University of Chicago totally changed my life. I went there having no idea what it was like. I had gone out to see it. Beautiful school. Most people think of it like NYU, that it's in the middle of the city, but it's not. It's in Hyde Park, which is a beautiful area, and the campus is really one of the prettiest campuses around. But it's a very unique place because it's, the life of the mind is what they talk about. And when I got there, I started to meet a bunch of kids and said, I don't know if I'm going to make it here. This is not, you know, and
Were they academic? Were they studious?
They were very studious, very serious.
Right.
And, you know, I was a decent student, but I wanted to have some fun too. You know, I was going to college.
Yeah. Sure.
And so in Chicago has a quarter system where you go, you know, not semesters. During my first quarter, I said, I don't know if this is for me. And so I applied to transfer to Penn. Mm-hmm. I had been rejected from Penn. Now I got into Penn. Okay, because as a transfer student, I guess it's easier when you're coming from the University of Chicago.
You took the back door.
Not so bad, right?
Yeah.
And I also didn't know whether I could compete at Chicago. Then I got my first set of grades, and I did pretty well. And I said, oh, okay, I guess I could. And in the meantime, there was a small group. There were some small fraternities at Chicago, and I ended up joining one and meeting a bunch of people that actually did want to go out and have a drink once in a while and, you know, date and whatever. Of course, you couldn't date girls at Chicago because you had to go to Northwestern or somewhere else because
they didn't like you because you were from Chicago.
No, it wasn't that. No, the girls, I don't want to be pejorative. They weren't that cute.
Okay, great. Got it.
Peter, let's just go back to your dad for a sec, because he had a saying that has really stuck with me, which is do more than what's expected of you.
Where'd you learn that?
And we did our homework.
Okay.
And
there is no question that was the single biggest influence on me.
Yeah, so when did that sink in for you? Where did that really...
When I first started in any job that I did. So when I was in high school, I caddied. Mm-hmm. Okay. And
on a golf course.
On a golf club that we belonged to.
Wow.
And, you know, most of the caddies kind of resented me because I was my parents were members of the club.
Yeah.
I never played golf. One of the things that I regret is my father and I never played together. And he was a great golfer, and I love golf now, but he wasn't the kind of father who said, okay, I want to teach you golf, which was kind of, when I look back, disappointing.
And you never asked? You never I want to play?
No. In fact, because he was so good and I was never much of an athlete, I figured I don't want to compete with that, so I played tennis. But I did caddy, and just at the beginning of starting to do anything where I was interacting with other people and having a responsibility, my father had, you know, he said, you know, whatever you do more than what's expected of you. And that has been a mantra that I've used as kind of the base of everything I've ever approached in life. And whenever I talk to younger people and kind of mentor or try to give them a view of how to look at the world, I think that, you know, that simple expression is incredibly meaningful, because just living up to the objectives of whatever you're doing, you know, it's okay. But if you want to make a difference, you have to really roll up your sleeves and do it. And
do you talk to your children now about that same expression? Have you sort of instilled that in the next generation?
Definitely.
Okay.
But I mean, my children are old.
Yeah.
You know, my son is 57 and my daughter's 53.
Young man.
Okay,
Yeah.
but you know, I've instilled that all the way through, and they've absolutely.
It's a much more succinct, elegant way of saying under-promise, over-deliver.
Exactly. It's a very simple, you know, everybody has their own thing. I mean, my father used to carry this little book around, and at the front of it said gumption. Okay, and then it had little sayings like, you know, about things to give you a drive. And I think a lot of it has to do with his own, you know, the fact that his father wouldn't pay for college. Yeah. You know, and interesting, it affected me too. And it affected his attitude towards how he should treat me as a young adult, because my wife, who's now my wife and will be married 60 years this summer.
Wow, it's incredible.
We met in high school, and we dated through the last end of high school. Went, you know, our separate ways. She went to school in New Jersey. I went to school in Chicago. We were not going to see each other, you know, be together. But in the beginning at Chicago, I was fairly lonely and hadn't dated much. And, you know, we would communicate. And then I went away during both of the first and second year summers. I went around the country with a bunch of guys. The first year around Europe, the second year And I think my parents encouraged that because they didn't really want the relationship with Lenny to continue. They thought I was much too young, which I probably was. After Lenny went to a junior college because her parents said, you're not serious enough, you're never gonna graduate from a 4-year school. So they said, you gotta go to junior college. And she went to a junior college in New Jersey and realized that she actually did pretty well and was gonna go on and get a degree. And so we never really talked about us being together. And then she applied to Boston University and got in, and she was going to Boston in her junior year. And I called her one day and I said, why don't you come out to Chicago? She said, I've already got into Boston. What are you talking about? You don't. Yeah. I said, I really would like you to come to Chicago. And so she ended up at the last minute applying, and she went to Lake Forest College in Lake Forest, Illinois.
Quite a bet she took on someone who she didn't know if you were serious. She didn't really know much about you at this point.
Well, she knew a lot about me, but she didn't know whether there was a commitment or not.
Right.
But, we were kids.
Right.
So, did it matter? Yeah. I don't know.
It was young love.
It was young love, exactly. Right. So, she took a risk, and her father, I remember, said to her, you really know what you're doing? You want to do this? And she said, I do. And so, anyway, she came out to Chicago, and I used to make the commute. Lake Forest is a northern suburb, and the university is in the southern part, south of the city, and I used to make that trip back and forth.
Better than Boston, anyway.
Yeah,
so,
it was definitely.
Right. Yeah. When you were in college, though, as you sort of thought about it, was it about, you mentioned earlier that your grandfather wanted your father to be a doctor, right? That is kind of, I went to law school not to become a lawyer because, frankly, everyone around me told me, if you're going to be a successful person, you should go to law school. And so, you have 3 choices: a doctor, a lawyer, maybe an accountant. Right?
Okay. Or an investment banker.
I wasn't, for my generation,
not for yours, yeah.
There is something deeply rooted in the Jewish psyche and Jewish culture about our parents, and frankly, our grandparents, my Bubby and Zadie telling me, you should go to law school because they can take everything away from you, but they can't take away that piece of paper.
No, it's the professional degree.
And so where did that come from?
You never hear you should go to trade school.
That's right.
No,
which you can also take with you.
No, because let's put it into perspective as, the Jewish ethos is education is a fundamental part of what being Jewish is, and also you marry the need for education and a degree, which is something that they can't take away from you, but also a profession that if you're part of the diaspora, and you have to go somewhere else because you can't. This is the psyche that goes back to the pogroms and all the way back. That if you're, you've got that.
Right.
You've got that experience that you can always make a living.
Yeah.
But why doctor, lawyer, and not electrician, plumber? Right? Because you can take that with you too.
Because it doesn't fit the educational psyche of the Jewish understanding of what success is. Not that, I have a nephew who's a plumber and very successful, makes a great living.
Yeah.
And his son went to Penn State and is now going to work in his business. So, it's a different world today, and people starting to respect the trades in a different way. But in our day, their ancestors were tradesmen. They didn't have the opportunity for education. So the objective was to be educated and to have some unique license or role that allowed you, that you could always fall back on. There was always an expression you can always fall back on.
I've heard this every day of my entire life. You get a law degree so you can fall back on it. To me, that speaks to multi-generational trauma almost. That for generations we were running away. We were trying to survive, and so I think our parents and grandparents wanted us to have a better life than they had.
You still get it from your parents. Harley runs one of the most successful tech companies in the world, and still keeps up his law license. Just in case.
I do.
You never know.
You never know. My CPA
That's right. It's a ridiculous thing, but again, it's kind of like.
I should have that practice.
Just in case, right? just in case. Let's talk about the CPA, because one of the things that we find fascinating about the story is, you and Nelson Peltz have had this incredible partnership and career together. You finish school, you become a CPA, which at a firm which I think became KPMG.
Pete Marwick.
Pete Marwick Mitchell. So here, take a step back.
Yeah.
So during in the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I was in a 3-2 program. Chicago had this great program where you could be in the college for 3 years and then go to either business school or law school for the next 2 years, which was a great program because this was now Vietnam was starting. I didn't want to go to Vietnam. There's another story I'll tell you about with my first child. But I was in a hurry. I wanted to make a living. I wanted to start my career. And so this was, the concept of MBA in those days, not that many people had MBAs, and it was long before they started saying you have to have a couple of years of experience before you go get your MBA. And frankly, my view is you lose the best and the brightest because the ones
never go back.
Are successful, they never go back and get the
100%.
MBA. But in any event, so I was in that program. And so here's a fun story about my parents and their attitudes about things. So Lenny and I got married between my first year of business school and my second year of business school. And my father said to me, "Okay, you're married. I'll pay for the tuition, but you're on your own." He didn't pay what the equivalent of room and board. He didn't pay anything. He said, because this was back to his psyche of
From his father.
His father.
Right.
And I said, okay. So I had some wedding present money. And
it's like your bar mitzvah money,
Right, exactly. So we had some wedding present money, and we lived. And I said, well, can I borrow some money from you for the first, to get started? And he said yes. So he lent me some money, and we lived in married student housing, paid $112 a month for a really nice apartment. And I took the winter quarter. So now I'm in my second year in majoring in accounting, because that was the profession. It was also my father's route. Because in those days, investment banking wasn't even a thing, and Jewish kids never were going into investment banking.
Why is that?
Because, there was, maybe Kuhn Loeb and Lehman Brothers, but they were tiny little firms, and all the rest of the banks were
no Jews.
No Jews. Okay.
So was the practice of raising money, emerging companies, and acquiring, was that all done privately without investment bankers in those days? Or how did...
Well, it was, and there were merchant banks who did that, but they were very small. It was mainly the commercial banks that raised money. And the whole financial world, that's a whole nother topic, but the whole financial world changed dramatically from the time I started out to later on, because it was really only the blue chip companies that were going public, raising money, doing financings, bond stuff, all of the, Mike Milken, who I was very close to still, and the finance that was created later was 10 years later from this
So the small
time.
Companies were family businesses?
They were family businesses, and they were financed by local banks. And that was it. And, traditional bank loans that were modest and highly secured and that kind of stuff. And the ability to be entrepreneurial and grow something from scratch wasn't that easy.
Sure.
Because there wasn't all kinds of resources of financing in those days. Anyway, just to finish the story so I took the winter quarter off, worked for Arthur Andersen, which was still alive in those days, 24/7 for 3 months. They paid time and a half of overtime.
So you wanted to do all the overtime.
I worked as much as I possibly could. Made enough money to pay for the rest of my year at school, to pay my father back, and have enough money for to start when we went back to New York. In between, during that first year, also, Johnson was president, and I'm sitting in my apartment one day, and my wife at the time she had graduated as a teacher, or she was either student teaching or teaching. She had a job at teaching in Chicago's school system. And she was out teaching, and I'm sitting watching TV, and Johnson gets on the television and says, we're stepping up Vietnam, we're stepping up the troops in Vietnam, we're ending, I had a student deferment and then a married deferment. We're ending married deferment, you have to have a child.
Wow.
So my wife, Lenny, comes home from school,
Time to have a kid.
And I said, we have to have a kid. I swear, she'll tell this story. She was furious. I mean, our original plans were, we weren't going to have a child for 5 years. We were going to travel.
Set up your life.
I mean, you're young at this point.
Yeah,
you're probably early 20s.
I was 22.
Right.
23. I was 22 at that time because John was born when I was 23. And I said, we have to have a child. She said, no way, go in the reserves, go do what you have to do. I said, no, I really want to start my career. And her nickname for me is Persistent Pete, even though nobody calls me Pete, but that
was her thing.
Her persistence is one of my hallmarks. And to make a long story short.
You had kids.
Okay, so actually a week later she said, forget this, I'm not ready. But it turned out she was pregnant. So we were lucky.
Too late.
And
you didn't have to go
and
to
that got you out of the
I
war.
didn't have to. So I saw I had to now a married to Furman, and I was able to get started in my career. And so I joined Pete Marwick Mitchell, now KPMG. At the time, it was the largest accounting firm in the world, and I had interned there for the summer before, so I knew the firm and I liked it. And my objective was, the thing about accounting, it's the language of business.
Yeah.
So the way I approached it, I was in the audit department, and the way I approached it was, this is a way to learn about lots of different businesses. And so, the typical professional accountant, you go out and you do your audit and you follow the audit guide and you do what you're supposed to do, which I did, and I was good at it. And but my objective was, what does this company do?
Yeah.
To really learn about the business and what do they do? What are their issues? And you really, when you're doing it, you get, as an auditor, you get to meet senior management,
right?
And you get to have, so, I wouldn't just ask them about an accounting question, or I would say, where are you taking this business? What's your objective? What are your problems? And it was a great education.
Sure, of course.
And my objective was to do it for a few years, to learn as much as I could, and then go do something in the business world. And it turned out that Nelson Peltz, who's been my partner now for more than 50 years, was one of my clients.
Yeah, and he was running his family's business.
He had a
at the
small
time.
family business that was in food service distribution business. They basically sold,
frozen foods and hospitals and stuff like that,
and stuff to restaurants and hospital, restaurant, all the institutional kind of clients, mainly restaurants and stuff. But he had this enormous ambition.
Even from the get-go, even when you first met him?
He always had, he's the child of, he's 16 years younger than his next sibling.
Okay.
And so he was from a different part of his family, and he married, his first wife's father was a very successful businessman, started Emerson Radio way back when. And that was his kind of mentor. And Nelson always wanted to build a big business. So even though he had he was part of this small family business, he went to Pete Marwick because it was one of the big 8 accounting firms.
Right. And he wanted to have...
And he wanted the imprimatur of a firm like that. So when he was ready to build the company, he had, the pedigree.
So before we go forward, though, one of the things Dave and I, when we were trying to understand and go deeper on, the Peter Nelson relationship, we sort of laughed and we share Dave and I both have the same accountants.
That one out, tell me.
Yeah. We have the same accountant who probably is going to watch the show and be like, I thought we had a better relationship, but we don't our relationship and most entrepreneurs' relationship with their accountant is fairly transactional.
Right. We wouldn't think of becoming partners with our
That's right. It's you have a job to do, an audit, tax filing, something like that, registration for a business. It sounds like your approach to accounting and your role as an accountant was very unique. It was very much more consigliere or business consultant.
In any professional role you have, you're good at it if you add value to your client. And adding value is not just answering a tax question or answering an accounting question. It's helping sort through business issues. and be a mentor. Consigliere is one way of looking at it, but not a mentor, but being a thought partner.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Nelson and I are the same age.
Yeah.
He's 6 months older than me, and we became friends, and so the relationship developed in a different way. And I had been offered jobs by other clients who wanted me to be a controller or whatever, and that wasn't in any way interesting to me. And I didn't think I'd stay as long as I did. But I never, there was also in the back of my mind, to be perfectly honest, my father was getting older. And in the back of my mind, I always said, he was very conservative in the company he built, although he built it to a pretty decent sized company. And in the back of my mind, there was always, well, maybe I should go and, take that company to a different level.
Be a retailer. Your history.
Yeah, exactly. But it was, they were in a number of different businesses and some great spin-offs from their company, which is a whole nother story. But Home Depot came out of Diana stores. Actually.
Wow, Home Depot.
How did that happen?
Yeah,
Ray, we need to go there.
Yeah,
I'll get to that.
Okay.
So you want to hear that?
Yes.
Story?
Yeah, we want to hear that
Kidding,
story.
please.
Yeah.
Okay. So my father his company had bought had expanded into discount stores, and they owned a company called Handy Dan Home Improvement, which was and Bernie Marcus was the general manager of that business.
Wow.
And Bernie came to my father and said, I think there's a real opportunity to build a big box retail concept. And my father's very conservative. He said, I don't think that's such a good idea.
I don't see it. Yeah.
Sounds expensive.
Sounds expensive.
And Bernie said, well, I'm going to do it. And he said, and I'd love you to invest. And he wanted my father to invest $250,000.
Which at the time was
Which was serious
the 60s
money.
probably,
This
right?
was in the 60s.
Yeah.
And my father said, I don't really think I'm going to do that.
Yikes.
The total capitalization of Home Depot, when it was ultimately, and there was all the stories about how Ross Perot was going to do it, and then he didn't, and that's how it got funded through Invermed, and but the total capitalization was $2.5 million. So my family would have owned 10% of Home Depot.
Oh my God.
which stays a market cap of somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million, I believe.
Exactly.
$200 billion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
But every old Jewish guy has a story of, I could have
If
invested.
I only could have invested in
no
it.
question.
It's the Jackie Mason joke, right? It's
You
like, you
bet.
see that building? I could have bought it for $10 million. And
When did you buy it?
What about you buy it now? Too
That
expensive.
story goes also with the home that I used to have in Palm Beach, which I sold a long time ago. And every time I drive by, I say, that house is now worth $100 million.
Exactly. I could have
It's
had
great,
it.
Peters, even at your level,
Right.
in your stage of life,
Right.
you're still doing that because we do
here's-
that all the time.
And my wife's answer is, so would we live differently?
Right.
That's right. That's right. So you decide.
So now
Nelson's your client.
So Nelson's my client.
He's ambitious.
So it was a confluence of things. I was named a partner, and
At KPMG.
at Pete Mowick,
Peter Mowick,
they told me you're going to be a partner, which was I was one of the younger guys to
Sure.
be, because again I always did more than was expected of me. I just a lot of guys were there ticking and tying and doing what they did, and I was creating value for my clients, so at the same time, Nelson was about to merge his company into a small public company, and he needed a financial guy. And he came to me and said, I'd love you to join me. And, I said, well, I don't want to be I want to have equity. I want
A partner.
I want to be a
Or
partner.
I want to be a partner. But I started as an employee, but, with equity and then together we built that company into the largest food service distributor in the Northeast.
Wow.
Which is a story unto itself, which we should talk about. But here you are on a fast track to be a partner at one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the country. What was that phone call like to your parents, where you're like, I'm going to leave and join this young kid with big ambitions who owns a frozen food company?
Right. It's interesting. I told my parents about it. My father encouraged me because he had done the same thing.
Interesting.
You know, he had left his accounting firm to join a client. And so, you know, he didn't know much about about Nelson or what the opportunity could be. And when I said to Lenny, I'm going to do this, I said, if it doesn't work, I can always go back to being an accountant, right?
Got the piece of paper.
Can always fall back to being right. So, so it was, you know, it was somewhat of a risk, but it didn't seem like a risk. And I was young, and you know, the world was in front of us. Even though we had 2 kids by that time, but I had and Nelson I knew he was going to be successful, and I liked the business that he had because it was a solid business. And so, you know, we took that company public. The funniest part was we did an IPO. We merged into this little company that was public through the pink sheets, which I don't even remember what that was.
So it was sort of like it was like an RTO kind of model?
Yes, but it was, you know, it was traded by appointment, you know, that kind of stuff.
Is this is the one with the vending machines, right? Or was it cable?
No, that was before. That was before that. This was Flagstaff Food Service was the name of the company.
Okay.
And we bought a company that made vending machines.
That was after.
But after we took this company, after we did an IPO. So we did an IPO to list on the American Stock Exchange, and so we traveled to 26 cities to sell this IPO to raise $7 million.
Yeah, your roadshow.
Which today, for our roadshow, raised $7 million, which today, you know, wouldn't be the fee.
Right.
On the deal, right? I mean, it was, but when you think about the perspective.
Sure.
And you used an investment bank, one of the small, even though it was a small industry at that time, you did use one.
We used Kidder, Peabody, and Wertheim and Company, 2 very prestigious firms. And
2 Jewish kids are using this prestigious firm. It's hilarious.
Right. Well, Wertheim was Jewish, but it was. So the irony is, here's a great story. So we're going to price the deal, and Fred Klingenstein at the time was the CEO of Wertheim, and they give us the price and we're not happy about it. And his answer was, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. We said, we're traveling 26 cities to sell our company, and this is what you look at, and you're sponsoring us, and that was your attitude.
So you have this IPO.
So we have the IPO. We now have a little cash.
Was that your first, for you and Nelson, was that the first time you guys had real money?
Well, we didn't have the money.
Well, I mean the company had the money.
The company had the money. No, we were still making salaries.
Okay.
But Nelson always lived big because his wife was wealthy, and he had made some money in the stock market, and he lived uptown on 72nd Street in the Co-op, and I lived in Peter Cooper Village.
Right.
And it was.
Yeah.
Did that make you impatient at all? I mean, there was such a discrepancy in your standard of living.
No, really not. Because I grew up, so what's interesting is he grew up in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. I grew up ultimately in a big fancy house on the water in Hewlett, Hewlett Bay Park, which is the fancy part of Hewlett.
So he had more of a chip on his shoulder.
So no, he really had a chip on his shoulder. He was hungrier than I was in that I knew what it was like, and I knew I'd get there. Yeah. And I had the confidence that I would be okay. I don't know that I ever had the expectation that it would be as big as it got, but, as you get into the things you do, your appetites get bigger.
So you weren't just perseverant, Pete, you were also patient, Pete.
I don't know if I was patient, persistent, not perseverant, but
yeah,
it's the same.
persistent, yeah.
I don't know that I was patient, but I was, patient might be the right word. That might be the right word. I was comfortable as long as I saw there was progress and there was light at the end of the tunnel of what we were building. And, we went through some really tough times. So we bought this company called Coffee Mat, which made coffee vending machines, and then had some accounting issues with it, which created a problem. And then we ended up selling the food service business and had some cash. And that's how we met Mike Milken. So at that time, Nelson was very friendly with Saul Steinberg, who built Reliance and unfortunately passed away a few years ago.
An icon.
An icon.
Yeah.
And a boy wonder,
Oh, wow.
kind of bad boy he went after, tried to take over a chemical bank when he was 29. Okay. And Nelson was very friendly with Saul, and Saul introduced us to Mike Milken.
Yeah.
And mainly to invest, because we had done this IPO and we had proceeds. Well, actually, I'm going ahead of myself, because we had done a financing for we had Flagstaff. We sold Flagstaff. We had some cash from the sale of Flagstaff, and we met Milken to invest the money, and we invested in junk bonds, which were fallen angels in those days.
Sure.
They were industrial grade A bonds that had gotten in trouble, and that's why they were called junk bonds.
Right. What was your first impression of Mike Milken when you first met him? I mean, he's a titan of industry.
He was, well, it was very early in the Milken days. So, he was in California, so I didn't meet him right away. I mean, it was really just through the phone and whatever, and Nelson had more of the relationship, but Milken was a force. I mean, we can get to that. He was just unbelievable. So we had sold the company, and now we had this cash, and we bought Coffee Mat, and now we were looking for business. This was also in the late 70s when the economy was in terrible shape, and Paul Volcker was the chairman
Interest rates are
of
through the roof.
The Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And we, so what happened is Flagstaff, which we sold, the food service business, was purchased in one of the first LBOs. It wasn't called LBOs in those days. It was just, a highly leveraged transaction. The guys who bought it were some friends of ours, and a guy named Ben Jacobson, I don't know if you've run across him, but he went on to do some private equity stuff.
Just for the listeners, LBO, leverage buyout.
Leverage buyout,
yeah.
Okay. It was one of the first, now it's private equity. In those days, there were LBO funds, okay. And so it was highly leveraged, but it was financed by GE, what was then called GE Credit, became GE Capital. And now this is 1970. We sold the company in 1978, I think. They were paying 3 over prime. Prime rate was the way you measured your loan, and prime was 21.
Right.
Wow.
Okay, so they bought this business. They were paying 24% in interest in a company that had 1 or 2% margins.
And they put very little cash down. Right?
And they put very little cash. They had very little equity, and on not listening to us when they bought the company. When they bought the company, they fired all of the management that we had built because they wanted to run it themselves. And it was a penny business. You lose a case of peas.
That's it.
And
Your
you
profit.
lost
There
the
goes the
profit
margin.
for the month. Okay, and they ended up going bankrupt. And so GE came to us and said, "We want you to help us work out of this bankruptcy." And at the time, when we had sold the company, we sold it for like $23 million, and we had taken back $1 million note, which was subordinated to GE's debt. So we said to GE, "Okay, we'll come in and try to get your money back, but we want our note pari passu to you." And they said, "Okay."
But at this point, you had moved on, right? You took your cash and you had bought
Well, we
coffee.
still had this corpus. This was now called Trafalgar Industries. I mean, we had so many different names of the companies over the years.
All with a T.
And it owned Coffee Mat.
Yeah.
And it had some cash. But Coffee Mat was doing badly. And we had taken control of a small coal company, helping out some friends. And that was also not doing very well. The world was really in trouble.
So even at this moment, you're not actively running these companies. You have management in place in them.
Well, we had management in place, but we were really,
hands-on.
It was like a conglomerate.
rolling up your
It was
sleeves.
sort of like a conglomerate. So we were very involved in the operations of the business.
So you had the coffee
So
company.
they asked you to come back in.
They asked you to come back in.
They asked us to come back in, and we ended up, and this was part of the philosophy that has now become the philosophy at Trian in our current business. we looked at these companies and what was left of the businesses that we had put together, and we said, and the bank's first reaction, as is always, a bank's reaction is sell the good businesses and write off the rest. And our view was absolutely the opposite. Let's fund the big business, the good businesses, and get rid of the junk.
Right.
And we convinced GE to overfund so that we could rebuild the company, the pieces of Flagstaff that we thought had value. Yeah. And we got rid of the rest of it. And to make a long story short, we were successful. We were able to sell those companies and GE got all its money back, and we got our $1 million note back.
And did you shed the ones that weren't working? Like you sold coffee?
No, Coffee Mat we still had in
so you never sold
we never
for a
got
loss.
rid of our other company.
Yeah.
We were doing this on the side because we didn't have any income.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we couldn't take a salary out of Flagstaff, or Triangle, because Trafalgar at that time, because we weren't making enough money. So when that happened, we started a consulting business called MPM Group, and we took on a bunch of other companies mainly in the food service distribution, or we did some work for Squibb that owned a company that made pastries, and we did some work for a few other businesses.
Did anyone ever turn to you and say, Peter, you got coffee, pastries, you got frozen, but you're all over the place. What are you doing here?
You know what? When you're in the middle of trying to stay alive, it
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You're fighting for everything that you can get and everything you can do. And while we're doing this, we're also going to the coal mines and making sure that the little coal company that we had an investment in was working.
So there's this term that we've heard thrown around when it comes to you and Nelson, which is constructive capitalism.
Well, that's part of Trian Partners. Mm-hmm. Okay.
But what is that?
It's
what is constructive capitalism?
It's not necessarily constructive capitalism. It's constructive investment. So we got lumped. We're jumping ahead here, but when we started the fund, and there's a long story to get to when we started the fund. We got lumped into a group of so-called activists, which meant that we were, taking a position in the company and rattling the cage.
Sure. Writing white papers,
sending letters to the board. But we never did that. Okay. We never wrote we wrote white papers, but we never threatened anybody. Our objective was to get our investments were only in companies that we thought were good companies that were either poorly managed, undermanaged, or missing opportunities. And so the constructive, we called ourselves constructivists because our view was we're trying to rebuild the company in a way that is entrepreneurial, try to get management, and these were decent-sized companies, try to get management to think as entrepreneurs. Think long-term. What would you do if you owned 100% of the company? And so the constructive part of it is we're not destructive. We're not trying, the activists in those days were leverage the company and sell a division and buy back stock and make the stock go up.
Yeah. And you weren't short sellers. You wanted the value to
we wanted to
go up.
create value in the business with a much longer horizon.
Yeah. People talk about fortune cookie sort of fortune cookie mottos or lessons and stuff. But one of the things that Dave and I researched, that there were these mugs that you and Nelson had that said
expenses down, sales up.
Sales up, expenses down on one side, and cash is king on the other side.
We love that. And I know that sounds almost like a fortune cookie piece of advice, but that's actually how you ran the business.
It is, and it's how we ran every business. It's how we ran every business up to that point. I mean, the thing that, there's this whole period where we built Triangle Industries into a major company, which is pre-Triad, which goes back to now after Coffee Mat and whatever.
You raise a fund.
We didn't raise a fund.
Okay.
We never raised a fund. When we sold, we had some money, and we were doing these consulting stuff, and we decided our real objective was to try to figure out how to invest in a company that would really build into a big company. And by that time, we got to know Milken well. And we had taken over a small company called Triangle Industries, which was in the wire and cable manufacturing business. And it also owned Rowe, which was a vending manufacturer. And we got to that because we owned in Trafalgar, we owned Coffee Mat, which made coffee machines.
Got it.
And the guy who was running Triangle, the CEO of Triangle, came to us to buy Coffee Mat. And he had just taken over Triangle, and he was a character. And we said to him, you know, we don't think you really like the business you're in. Why don't you sell us Triangle Industries and instead of buying Coffee Mat? And it ended up that we figured out how can we raise the money, and so we leveraged everything we had.
Wow.
We I said
You went all in.
we went all in. Nelson had more money than I did, so he ended up with a bigger piece of it.
Okay.
But we took every dollar that we had and we bought his equity. So we bought like 26% of the company. We got a margin loan from Bankers Trust, and we got a personal unsecured loan, except secured by my house, my apartment, and Nelson's house, and he had a bigger house.
Oh, wow.
And from Manufacturers Hanover Trust, and we took control of Triangle Industries.
But this is sort of, I mean,
in 1983.
What
And you
I
don't
would
need
call
this.
like this is like Meshuggah. Like
Yeah.
It was crazy.
It was crazy.
I
Why are you doing
remember
this?
I went home to Lenny. We had, at that time, we were now living on.
Lenny must have thought you were nuts.
Because you're well off at this point, right?
Well, it was comfortable.
Yeah.
I was living in a co-op on 81st and on 71st and 3rd, but a nice apartment.
Nelson's certainly comfortable.
And Nelson was, when Nelson had, I forgot, but Nelson was living on 5th Avenue.
Yeah.
And we were okay and making a living. And I said to Lenny, I'm putting it all in. We're taking control of this company. We think we can make something out of it. And if it doesn't work,
I can always fall back
to my category.
I can always, really, I had that conversation. I remember sitting in our little den in the apartment.
It's timeless across every Jewish generation. I can always fall back on my law degree, my medicine degree,
my accounting. I kept up my CPA degree. And
so what do you see? I mean, it's a vending machine business. Like, what's so special?
But here's what it was, okay? And the day the deal closed, I mean, the dynamics of getting that deal closed were crazy because the board, it was a New York Stock Exchange company, Triangle Industries, and the board was very white shoe. And when we wanted control of the board, they said, no way.
How old are you at this point?
42,
Pushing 40, yeah.
Something like that. So they agreed to allow us to go on the board for the guy who was CEO to stay as CEO, or to become chairman. Nelson became CEO, I became COO for 6 months to see if we could keep the company going. And then
So not only did you put everything on the line to get, it's not to buy the whole company. You bought 26% of the company.
We bought 29%, and it
So you have
kept
all
it
these
public.
partners.
So we had, it was a public company, and
Right.
we had the responsibility of now.
Wow.
And we moved our offices. The headquarters of the company were in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and we moved our office. So we moved out to New Brunswick.
And when you put all your chips in, do you know that you're going to be CEO and COO, or you don't even know at that point?
Well, no, we knew.
You knew.
That was
part of the deal.
That was the proposal,
Got it.
and we wouldn't have done the deal if we didn't have the ability to have influence.
Yeah.
So the first thing we did was start looking at the businesses that they had, and the wire and cable company was losing money, and the vending machine company, the day we closed, the guy tells us, by the way, the biggest plant in the vending machine business is now on strike. And that strike lasted a year, which was wonderful. But we used it as an opportunity to really restructure that business. And we ended up in the first year, rolling up our sleeves, getting to know those businesses and improving them. And we used the vending machine business to get into some of the gaming we created. They also made jukeboxes. So we created a video jukebox, which didn't work all the time. And one of the great
Could have been Spotify.
I wish.
But that model you would continue to use, which is find companies,
figure out how to make them better. But we also knew that neither the vending business nor the wire and cable business were businesses that really had the opportunity to grow much further than they were. The commodity, the wire and cable is really a commodity business. So we figured we'd be much better off using the balance sheet, leveraging the company, and figuring out another direction to go. And that was when Milken was now in his heyday. So we said, okay, let's see if we can raise a blind pool. Let's see if we can raise funds. So we went to Milken first, and he wanted us to do a senior subordinated note. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to do something junior so that we'd have more flexibility in capital structure. So at that time, LF Rothschild, which doesn't exist anymore, was another bank that was starting to do some high yield kind of stuff. And they did our first deal. And we raised with them $140 million. And,
which is an incredible amount of money.
Which was a huge amount of money considering that the market cap of Triangle was $45 billion.
Right.
Yeah, so here you got two young guys who have leveraged everything on their personal side,
right,
who are now asking for a ton of leverage on a business,
right,
to take a business and transform it into an entire other business.
You got it. Yeah. You got it. This was the pyramids on pyramids, but with legitimate cash flows.
Yeah.
Okay. So Triangle had enough of a cash flow to support the subordinated debt. And so now we go to Milken. Now Milken was furious because this was the one deal he didn't do that.
And Rothschild got it.
Right, and because Rothschild got it. So he comes to us, and now we do a senior subordinate. Now we have like 200 and some odd, almost $280 million. And now we start looking for a deal. And on the cover of Triangle Industries annual report, in those days you printed annual reports. In the cover the cover of the report, we said, we want Triangle Industries to become a major industrial force. That was our objective.
And it's $300 million at 20% interest rates?
No, 15.
15,
yeah.
Okay.
It's much better.
Much better.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, this was, that was good financing. So now we identify National Can, which was in the middle of a fight. There was this, I don't know if you know the name Victor Posner, but Victor Posner was, if you ever do any research, he was the villain of Wall Street.
Okay.
Okay. He was a guy who
What made him like that?
Yeah.
Oh, he bought all these companies and and totally raped them. He would take huge compensation, pull them apart.
He was sort of the opposite of what you guys wanted.
Exactly.
The first corporate rate.
He was a terrible. He was a terrible guy, but he owned 40 some odd % of National Can, but he didn't have control. He had no board seats. He had nothing, and the company National Can was trying to get away from him, so they were doing an ESOP supported tender offer to,
which is the employees basically putting the money in.
Employees plus financing from Solomon Brothers at the time, for 52% of the company, so he would be sterilized.
Got it.
And we said we want, and he thought he was going to get that deal done. We went to Milken and said, okay, we think we can take the whole company over, and so we did a tender offer for 100% of the company, and we topped the bid that the company had. And we also said, we need some additional financing to do this deal. And at that time, most of the deals that Drexel was financing never got done. Mm-hmm. People were basically just making arbitrage on the stock they bought, sure, and then whatever. And this was one of the first deals that actually got closed. And of course, Milken and his team were really nervous that it was going to be successful. But we ended up winning we ended up buying the company, and then we realized that we started to really get into it in great detail and roll up our sleeves. And our view was, National Can was a really good company. Its primary business was beverage cans. So, and this was at the time where Coke had come out with Diet Coke, and Pepsi was growing, and Anheuser-Busch was the biggest customer, and so it was it was a good business, but it was very narrowly focused. And our view was, okay, how can we take this business and make it into a major packaging company?
Yeah.
And they were only domestic. So the first thing we did was start looking international, and we were able to follow Coke as it went around, and at that time it was a period of time where internationally, where two-piece beverage cans, which is an aluminum can that's extruded with a top. Those are the two pieces. Were the primary beverage can very efficiently manufactured in the U.S., but internationally it was all glass, recyclable, returnable glass bottles. So we followed Coke as they started to expand internationally, and we built can plants around them.
Now, you have a blind pool of money, correct?
Well, not anymore. Now we don't have any money.
No, before this deal, though.
This company.
Before you buy American Can, you can basically go into any industry you want with that money.
We were totally opportunistic. Right. What's something in play?
So you can go anywhere. When you go to find a deal, is that how you start? You say what's in play and you go from there, or did you go and say Coke is the gold rush and we're going to sell the picks and the cans are the picks
No, what's available, what's in play at that time. Remember, we're
you go to Milking, you go to the bankers.
Nobody knew us. We had no cred.
Yeah.
We were just guys trying to figure out how to take advantage.
You're like, I'm going to make chicken salad at a chicken shit.
You got it. How to do something like that.
Yeah.
And so so we built we started to build an international business. We also said we need to be much broader based in packaging, not just cans, because at that time, Coke was busy buying up its bottlers, and Anheuser-Busch, which was our single largest customer, was starting to have their own can plants. So all of a sudden, we're seeing a consolidation of our customer base, which was going to put a lot of pressure on margins.
Sure.
And so we needed to figure out how can we diversify. We also did some very entrepreneurial things. We went to Alcoa, we were Alcoa's largest customer.
They're the aluminum company.
We were the largest aluminum consumers in the world.
Wow.
At that point.
Wow.
So we went to Alcoa, and they were given it, at the time it was 210, terms, and we said, we need a loan because we're a highly leveraged company.
Yeah.
They said, we can't give you a loan, but we can give you 90-day terms, which was huge in terms of—
At 50% interest.
No, but because we were paying 15% interest, and this was interest-free 90-day terms, this was a big deal.
Yeah. Right.
We also found the company had an overfunded pension plan, which we were able to take some cash out of, so we started to pay back some of our debt right away, which was important to strengthen.
And are you and Nelson aligned on this whole thing? I mean,
absolutely.
The partnership was really working.
We were joined at the hip. We did everything together.
You knew that the ambition was the same.
Absolutely. I mean, we were just totally focused on how to make this thing better.
And what was your role relative to Nelson's role? Was there sort of, were you operations and he was sort of the storyteller?
The inside guys.
They kind of bled.
Okay.
It's hard, in those days, we were both doing everything. I mean, I would do the detail on all the financings and negotiate the covenants and all of that. And, and he did, he got very involved in some of the sales stuff. Okay. I mean, he went, when we took over American Cans Packaging, that he had to go meet with Procter & Gamble because we were a supplier to their toothpaste tubes, and they were worried about these entrepreneurs who were taking over this company. So, he was more Mr. Outside. Okay.
Yeah.
But in terms of the strategy, we were totally aligned. So then we said, okay, how do we make this into a big packaging company? Again, everything is opportunistic in this world. And at that time, now we're at the Milken Conference, and we meet Jerry Tsai, who, I don't know if you know that name, but another legend on Wall Street who had been, first a major, well-known investor and ended up becoming CEO of American Can Company. Okay. And he had tried to, he and others had taken American Can Company into becoming a major conglomerate. And it owned record distribution company. It had owned, and he had he bought an insurance company, and then he bought commercial credit, and then he bought Smith Barney, and he wanted to turn it into a financial services business, and the packaging business was like an orphan.
Sure.
And they used the cash flow from packaging
to build the finance
for
business.
all these other businesses, sure. But totally just let the packaging company go fallow.
And for you, that was an opportunity.
And so we got to know Jerry at a Milken conference, and we said,
"Oh, the Milken conference was that."
That was the
even then it was
Predators Ball.
Wow.
Oh yeah, we went every year. It was a lot of fun.
The thing to do.
Yes, it was. Yeah, you had to do it.
Sure.
And it was fun.
Amazing. Yeah.
So Jerry was about to become CEO of American Can, and he said to us, assuming I become CEO, I'll sell you the packaging business. And so he became CEO, and we then bought American Can's packaging group, which consisted of a food can business that was terrible, that had been totally neglected, but a plastics business where they made much more value-added stuff, including they invented the toothpaste tube that was now the current tube, was called the laminate tube.
The laminate tube.
Laminate tube.
I didn't know there was a name for that.
They invented the squeezable Heinz ketchup bottle.
That's a big one.
Yep.
Solved a major problem.
No, absolutely. It was,
Yeah.
So they had value-added products, again, that they hadn't really developed because they were using the cash flow for their diversification. And so we started to invest in those businesses, and we combined American Can's can business with National's, took $130 million of costs out by getting rid of some redundant plants and some duplicate overheads, and built it into what became the largest packaging company in the world.
I mean, you did what the coffee mug said, right? Sales up, costs down, cash is
And you finally went narrow and deep versus...
Exactly. It was blocking and tackling, but it was having a vision to make a multinational business that was really dominant in the industry.
I want to talk about that for a second, because you said everything in this world is opportunistic. How did you balance that, where listening to your story, in one sense, you guys are by the seat of your pants in many ways. You're in coffee, you're over here, you're over there. But in other ways, you do have a long-term strategic vision. How did
Well, the long-term strategic vision was always about the business we were in.
At the time, whatever that was.
Whatever that was. In other words, whatever we were doing, we wanted it to really be an important entity in its field.
Right.
So, even when it was the food service business, it was a couple little locations. We wanted it to be the most important food service distribution company. And so our objective was always, look at what you got and how do you make it more important?
Sure.
And really, make a difference. So in the packaging business, the timing was very good. We bought National Can. We bought the businesses at pretty low multiples because they weren't much in favor. Sure. And we took a lot of costs out. I mean, when we bought, so just from the financial dynamics, National Can had about $60 million in EBIT when we bought it. American Can was break even in EBIT. EBITDA was not a term in those days.
So we had a conversation over dinner last night. Yeah. I'm going to pause you here for a second. Right now, we all talk about EBITDA, right? The D and the A is depreciation, amortization.
Right.
But you and Nelson are famous that you never even thought about depreciation, amortization. It was all about earnings before interest and taxes.
Because of the businesses we're invested in.
Why at the time was that
Because the DA didn't belong to you.
Yeah, you eventually got to
When you're in an industrial business, you got to spend the DA. You got to spend the depreciation. Yeah. You got to reinvest in capital in your businesses. So if you look at EBITDA as free cash flow, it's not free cash flow.
Right. Yeah.
Because you got to spend the capital. Yeah. So we looked at EBIT because the depreciation
That was yours.
Was ours.
That's right.
The depreciation had to go back into the business. Yeah. In fact, the way we built that company is the depreciation at the time was maybe $60, $70 million. We took capital spending in our last year up to $300 million because we opened the floodgates. We started to get, these were two stodgy old businesses run by relatively conservative management teams. We combined the businesses. We backed the guy who ran National Can because there wasn't really any senior management left at American Can. He was the better horse, but he was a guy who thought he was the only one who knew everything about what was going on in the business because everybody else reported directly to him. Sure. And fortunately, he liked to spend winters in Florida. So when he was in Florida, we would get all the senior management and say, okay, tell us what you want to do with your business, the glass business, the can business, whatever. And they would come up with all these great ideas
that he was
blocking because he didn't want to spend more than depreciation in CapEx.
And you didn't care who was in charge. You just cared about which was the best idea.
What was going to be the best idea? Yeah. So we said, okay, let's get a batting average of these guys, and if they can get the returns they're talking about, we'll do it. And by the third year, we realized these guys really knew what they were doing, and we built this business around them. So, it became, the sales originally of a National Can was like $1.2 billion. American Can was $1 billion. By the time we sold the company in 1988, it was $4.5 billion, but the EBIT was $400 million.
Wow.
But hold on, the DA is not necessarily, so for people listening, it's the idea of depreciation amortization is if I have a machine and I buy it once, I have to assume that I need to buy it again in 10 years. But in what you're saying here, you were able to make those capital investments, not just as sort of a maintenance investment, but more as to add a ton of value.
Maintenance. Yeah. The depreciation part was pretty much keeping it status quo.
Right. You went above and beyond.
We went way above and beyond it because,
Yeah.
But there's something else that there's a bit of a theme here, and we got to talk about Wendy's and Tim Hortons, and there's all this stuff we want to talk about here. But before I do that, one of the things that David and I heard as we did our research on you and you in particular, but also Nelson as well, there was this one line that we heard over and over again, which was that they don't need to be right. They much prefer to be rich.
That's Nelson's line.
And I want to...
Nelson's line was always, I'd rather be rich than right.
Can you explain that?
Well, the idea was, let's try stuff. And if it doesn't work, let's go on to the next thing. Or I don't have the best ideas, but I want to hear of other people's ideas. And our objective is to be successful. It isn't to prove our point.
Right.
And
that carried you throughout the entire journey.
That's absolutely critical it should carry everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to take a risk, it's got to be calculated. But, you also have to recognize that not every idea works. Not everybody has the best ideas, has the only good ideas. And sometimes half of a loaf is better than none. It's all these, cliches, but
you took your ego out of it. It wasn't about Nelson or Peter. It was about...
No, it was what's the best idea and how's it going to work, and show it to me and prove it.
Right.
Did any of these businesses ever not work? Did you ever have to sell some at a loss?
Yeah, we had some duds.
You did?
Yeah, we've had some duds. We had some pieces. We had more afterwards, in Trian. We've had some, few investments that didn't work for various different reasons. But, most of the time we've done pretty good homework. And you try to figure out how to weave, how to go make a left turn if the...
Is that harder? I mean, we're talking about this idea of I'd rather be rich than right. Is it easier to put your ego aside when you feel someone else has a better idea versus, say, admit defeat in a business that you had a very strong conviction in and that you spent time and energy on, but it just didn't work for a variety of reasons?
I don't think either one of us looked back much. I think, you face what you got and you move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And, we've been lucky that most of it's worked.
Yeah.
So, if you spend a lot of time davening over what you did wrong, it doesn't really accomplish a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, you learn from every mistake you make. I mean, one of the things we learned early on is with when you take on a lot of leverage, you got to have a lot of liquidity.
Yeah.
And a couple of situations that we had that didn't do well were because we got caught from a cash flow point of view, where you had a call where the business might have been okay, but you didn't have enough time to work your way through it. And
the debt got called and you're out of money.
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about sort of this project of Big Shot, and a lot of it has to do with archiving the stories of these incredible entrepreneurs like you, Peter. But there's sort of a through line throughout all these stories, and some of our past guests, I know you're very close to some of them, but there's a sense of chutzpah here, and I'm curious for you, what does chutzpah mean to you when you kind of hear it as, you're a proud Jewish leader and entrepreneur, but what does chutzpah mean to you, and why do you think why is it so baked into the Jewish culture, in your view?
Good. Well, chutzpah is putting yourself out to just take a risk, to take it, to take advantage. It can be used pejoratively too. That it's, it's a.
How dare you?
Yeah, the nerve.
Yeah, the nerve of that guy.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. But to me, it's it's the same as do more than is expected of you. It's just go after something and be somewhat myopic about trying to make sure that it's going to get done. And I think that, part of the Jewish psyche is there's always this fear that somebody's after you, or that, you're going to be taken out, or that, and I don't really feel that way. Maybe right now I do with what's going on in the Middle East.
Scary time right now.
In Israel, which is really scary and very worrisome. But, and I spent a lot of my philanthropic world in the Jewish world. But I think that there's just part of it, because we're a minority of such a small minority who have been uniquely successful in the context of the scale of the world, that there's always this feeling that we got to do, we got to do more.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the Jewish kitzkas.
I know. I mean, that's sort of the irony of the whole thing, is whether you're, in your 40s like us, or whether you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s, this feeling of, you're still a young man, but but with some of our other guests are in their 90s, that this feeling of, am I doing enough? Have I done enough? Do I have enough? Have I made it yet? I mean, when did you know you made it?
I don't know if I have. You never have enough. I mean, I'm sitting in a world today where I'm very successful. And I look at the amount of money that some of my peers have made, who started out pretty much same time, who have these huge multi-billions of dollars. And I don't even, first of all, I don't know what to do with that kind of, I give away a lot more than I spend, because it's important to me. But, I don't think you ever really feel like you've made it. I think you feel like I'm reasonably sanguine about who I am and what I've accomplished in my life. And it's not strictly related to all the things we've been talking about in terms of the business side. Probably the most rewarding part of my life has been some of the philanthropic stuff I've done, particularly the rebuild of Mount Sinai Health System, which today is one of the powerhouses in healthcare, and certainly in New York and in the country, from which was in pretty bad shape when I.
Well, you took an approach called engage. What we now understand is the term that you've said, that you've used, is engage philanthropy. And engage philanthropy, to us at least, and please help us understand it, because frankly, one day, if we're lucky enough to do stuff like that, David and I, we'd love to, take a cue from you, which is you've taken a very, dare I say, entrepreneurial approach.
Absolutely.
You were a constructive activist for Sinai Health, which was in trouble.
You went into these hospitals and said, look, I'm going to give money, but I'm also going to give my time, my strategy, my entrepreneurial instincts to help this. Why?
Well, that's my hope. So I grew up, again, my family was always my mother was a social worker. She was early in the not-for-profit world, first Jewish president of a temple, very active in the Jewish community. And my father wasn't an active philanthropist, but he gave money away. And I always was brought up that, when you have the opportunity to give back. But I early on realized that you get to a certain point in your life where you can write a check and it's easy. And it's important. And every not-for-profit organization needs supporters and they need people who are just willing to write a check and that's it. But if you really want to make a difference, if you want to have impact, then you have to use your own background, your own experience, your own capabilities to work on an organization that you think can use those talents and make a difference. And so I've always approached, I started, first with my kids' school, like most people do, got on the board of, gave money and started raising money for the school. But then I said, okay, well, how do we improve what the school's doing? Well, I didn't get into the education side, but it was the Ethical Cultural School. Fieldston at the time was run by Ethical Cultural Society, which was kind of a confusing thing. And we helped kind of separate the school from the society, which was valuable. But I've always approached philanthropy the same way, that I want to understand what the organization's doing. If I believe in their mission, how do we make it better? How do we improve it? And Sinai was unique in that they came to me. I was on the board of Sinai for a while, and I got into it because they saved my daughter's life as a newborn.
Wow.
She had a blood issue that Sinai had to change her blood several times, and she wouldn't have survived if we hadn't been in the Sinai neonatal. So that's a whole other story that I don't need to go into. But so I felt a kinship and a need to give back to Sinai, and early on started making contributions. When I went on the board, I wasn't. It was the time we were building Triangle, and it was a very busy time for me career-wise. But then as I started to become more successful, or things got a little more stable, Sinai was in more and more difficulty, and a group came to me because by that time we had a reputation of doing turnarounds, and said, we need you to get involved on the finance committee and see what's going on. And make a long story short, I ended up becoming chairman, using my skill set.
Yeah.
Again, it was at a time Sinai was always a great medical center. It was founded as the Jews' Hospital in 1852 by a group of philanthropists, because Jews couldn't be treated in anything but a state institution in those days, and Jewish doctors couldn't practice in any private hospitals.
Built their own.
So you built their own.
Yeah. So they built their own, and for many, many years it was always a place of great research, even though it didn't have a medical school. And in 1968 they decided, okay, the prejudice is gone. We can't retain our people unless we have a medical school. It's the only hospital that created a medical school. And it was always a great institution, but it had some poor leadership over time and had gotten into financial difficulties as New York was, had a lot of competition. And the approach at the time, before I became chairman, was what can we cut? And again, our philosophy is you can't cut your way out of a problem, you got to invest your way out of a problem. And that's what we did at Sinai. And we fortunately had some assets that we could mortgage, and we reinvested and rebuilt it, and
it's incredible.
Did you also cut though? I mean, sales up, expenses down. Did you?
Well,
you invest your way out of the problem.
In that case, there wasn't a lot to cut. In
Got
that
it.
case, we really had to invest. We had to really start rebuilding and investing. We invested in stuff like technology, which resulted in being much more efficient. So there were savings in terms of headcount related to billing and stuff like that. But more of it was more of it was rebuilding.
What's the impact of Sinai today on the broader New York worldwide community?
Sinai is the largest healthcare, largest medical center in New York City.
Right.
Not Jewish, just
helped all walks of life. Yeah.
Its medical school, which was like number 45 in NIH grants when I came in, is now in the top 10, and number 3 in dollars per investigator because it's a smaller school.
Sure.
It's considered one of the finest academic health centers in the country.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And,
So one of the things we have to sort of let you go soon, otherwise we'll take all your time, but there seems to be sort of this, we talked a bit about this sort of latent survival mode that all of us are in as Jews.
right.
And I'm curious, if speaking to the next generation of people that want to be Peter, that want to have your success, that not even your success from a business perspective, your success and impact just from a societal perspective, what would you say to that next generation of young people, Jewish or not, who want to sort of emulate a similar career path and a similar impact that Peter May has had?
Well, from a career path, you got to figure, something that you really like to do. You got to get up in the morning and really be excited that you're going to the office or you're going to wherever you're going, and Zoom. But I'm not a big believer in
You like it in person.
I like it in person. Zoom has been great, and we would never have gotten through COVID.
We could have many more guests if we did this virtually, but there's something different if you're sitting here with us.
There's no question that, and you can't train and you can't give culture absorption to anybody unless you're together. But putting that aside, so find something that you really like to do because it's critical that you enjoy going to work. Find people that you like to be with and you enjoy and that you can learn from and work with in a way that gives you satisfaction and that are willing to appreciate what you have to do. So in a business point of view, I think it's, one of the biggest things that I find frustrating when I look at the younger people today is they want this satisfaction and this gratification in 2 minutes.
Yeah, instant.
And if they're not feeling fulfilled, they got to look do something else. Well, it doesn't work that way. You got to build. You got to sink your teeth into something that means something to you, and you got to put your whole self into it, and you've got to give it time, because things don't get built overnight. I mean, maybe you have a brilliant technology idea and somebody else buys it really fast. That's great. Okay,
those don't happen.
But those don't happen very fast. And all the unicorns and all the things, and you guys are the beneficiaries of that. But you worked your asses off to get there. And you still do.
We still do. And actually, that thing your father said, which is do more than what's expected of you. It is timeless advice.
It's timeless advice.
And you can almost add on to it, your point about instant gratification. Do more than what's expected of you, and do it day after day, month after month, year after year, and decade after decade.
Exactly, and understand that the gratification comes slowly.
Right.
And but it's but if you enjoy the building part. If you enjoy seeing the progress and you feel like you're having an impact, then you don't even notice that the time's going by. You just do it, and it happens around you. And I think in terms of the not-for-profit work, in terms of philanthropy, it's the same thing. Pick an area that you really enjoy. I mean, I've kind of focused my philanthropy in 3 different ways. One is Jewish, and I was chair of Operation Exodus, which is one of the most rewarding things, where we essentially, when you look back, transformed Israel. I mean, Israel's tech industry today is primarily the result of the million people who came from the former Soviet Union, who were all scientists and educated people who had great skill sets and brought that to Israel.
And how did you facilitate that? I mean, how was that done?
So in 1989, 1991, Gorbachev became the head of Russia, of the former Soviet Union, and he allowed, when Perestroika came in, he allowed the Jews who were the refuseniks, the people who wanted to be Jewish and didn't want to stay in the Soviet Union, he allowed them to leave.
Wow.
And so UJA Federation of New York and National UJA created this thing called Operation Exodus, and I was chairman of it, and we raised nationally $800 million, in New York $250 million.
Wow.
It was the largest single fundraising campaign at the time.
Yeah.
And we facilitated the relocation of 1 million people over a 4-year period.
Out of Russia.
Out of the former Soviet Union to Israel. And if you look at Israel today, I mean, and included providing the transportation, providing education. We had housing for them temporarily, language training, job training. Guys who were doctors couldn't practice in Israel because they didn't have the same.
So you helped them get certified.
They had to get recertified. They had to become nurses first, whatever. The joke was an entire cultural revolution in Israel. The joke was when I used to do missions to Israel, and you'd greet a plane from Moscow coming and landing at Ben Gurion Airport. And the joke was if they weren't carrying a violin, they were pianists. So because 25 orchestras got created in Israel as a result of this.
And not to mention startups, technology companies.
Yes, these were the entrepreneurs of Russia.
Yeah. And they came
and if you look at what's the stagnance of Russia since then, because they've had this huge brain
exodus
drain.
of brain drain, and to Israel's benefit, they've created this whole other economy.
Exactly,
that's incredible. I didn't know that story.
Which from that sprung the tech sector.
Exactly, that's where the tech sector came from. But so my view on it's Jewish stuff. Then it was education, and I was on the board of the University of Chicago for many, many years. And then healthcare.
Or are they lucky that the Ivy League schools didn't accept you once upon a time?
Right.
Yeah, well, that probably. From the amount of money I give them.
That's right. That's pretty good. We're going to let you go, but last thing. How do you think about legacy? Whether it's Trian, or it's your family, or it's your philanthropy, what does legacy mean to you?
I don't think a lot about legacy. I think the most important part of my legacy is that I've given a sense of what I care about to my children and to my grandchildren, a sense of the same, do more than what's expected, the ethical imprimatur, the desire for making a difference. My kids are both very active in a lot of stuff, a lot of not-for-profit stuff. And my grandkids are going in that direction. I have a granddaughter who's now in medical school.
Amazing.
Which is exciting.
The highest calling.
And I have
after private equity.
After private,
right.
That's right.
And I have another granddaughter who's about to go to law school to be a social justice lawyer.
Amazing.
And I have another grandson who's a teacher.
Amazing.
So they're not following me. And I have one who's majoring in finance. Okay. And he might, he wants to do that. But, the legacy to me is that people think that you've made a difference in the good things that are important in the world, not that you've made a lot of money.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it is a great honor to have spent what is now almost 2 hours together.
Yes.
It's a great honor to sit down with you, Peter.
Thank you so much.
We are, David and I stand on the shoulders of giants, and sometimes those giants don't even know we're standing on their shoulders. Yeah. And you're one of those people.
I think you guys have done a lot of really exciting things, and the fact that you care about this means you're learning.
We love it.
We love it.
It's a gift to us, and hopefully everyone that watches. And we hope.
And I got some not-for-profit stuff that I can get you guys.
Please, we'd love to. Especially when it comes to matching entrepreneurial spirit and chutzpah with an amazing cause. I mean, we're entrepreneurs by nature. We've been building since we were kids. Right. But I really, really appreciate sitting down with us for a good time.
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now my whole team in. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now the whole team.